Alright, the subject of this video is something called standard deviation. Standard deviation is a very, very, very important tool in science. We use it to talk about groups, okay? One thing that it helps us do is it helps us compare individuals in groups. Another thing that it helps us do is it helps us show difference in a group. And another thing that it helps us do is it helps us compare the difference in groups. The way that it does this, first of all, we find standard deviation whenever we measure a certain amount of individuals and then we measure anything about them. Now, one thing that we've found, what scientists have found, is that when we do this and then we plot it on a graph, okay, whenever we come up with some individuals over here and we measure anything about them, it falls under something called a bell curve. And this is a natural phenomenon, and scientists are convinced that this is just what happens whenever we measure populations of any kind of living organism. It falls under the bell curve. So, when we start to look at the bell curve and we try to understand what it's telling us, okay, we can start to split it up into various divisions. If we go right down the middle of the bell curve, what that means is 50% of the measurements of the amount of individuals that we had are this way, and 50% of them are this way. Okay? And so this is called the 50th percentile. Now, right in here, in this group here, this is where the bulk of individuals usually lie. And this is about roughly 68% or so, okay? From here on over, 16% of individuals are here, 2% of individuals over here, and 0.05% of individuals are right in that tiny little corner. On the other side, we have 84% of individuals are from here down, 98% of individuals are from here down, and 99.05% of individuals are from here down. So that means that the smallest amount of measurements over here are going to be found in this area. And the largest measurements in the group are going to be in this area. And the average, the mean of the measurements are going to be right here. So if we are thinking about beans, if we're going to measure beans, here is what we could do. Let's say that the average of all of our beans are right here. We'll call that 10. Okay? And we'll just go like this. We'll make it easy. 9, 8, 7, 11, 12, 13. Right there. So those are the numbers of our measurements. What we can say about our population is that most of the population falls between 9 and 11. Okay? And that 13 is a very big bean, but it's very rare. And 7, those are small beans, but they're also very rare. 0.05% of all of the beans are going to be that small. Now, if we're going to talk about the difference in how different the group is, that's when we can start to figure out what the standard deviation of all of this means, okay? And so if we're going to measure the difference between this line and here, right there, that is 1, okay? And what we call that, this is a z-score, so z equals 1, okay? So the difference between all of these measurements is 1. It doesn't have to be 1, but according to the calculations that we did in order to come up with this case, it's 1. So we have 1 here, 1 here, 1 here, 1 here, 1 here. So every time it changes by 1, we're moving a standard deviation. So this is 0, okay? In terms of standard deviation, one standard deviation is this way. So this is a standard deviation positive, and this is a standard deviation negative. This would be +2. This would be +3. This would be -2, and this would be -3 standard deviations. So this is a very, very important tool for talking about populations. This tells us about different kinds of populations and the differences that they have. Okay? If we're looking at different populations, we're trying to measure differences in the populations, we can look at the bell curves. We can actually put them right next to each other. Let's say we measure this. That would be a kind of bell curve. That would be a kind of bell curve. And that would be a kind of bell curve. And each one of these are going to have different standard deviations. And this number right here is going to tell us how different the populations are. Okay? So that's the subject of standard deviation. It's a very important tool in science whenever we're processing data. And I think that you guys are going to have to know how to do this for a lot of different labs in the future. Thank you very much.